He pointed a diamond cuff-linked finger at the colossal oak doors of their 10-bedroom mansion and uttered the words that shattered her world. "Get out. You have nothing. You are nothing without me." Lillian Sterling, dressed in a silk robe with only her handbag, was cast out into the cold night by her billionaire husband, Damien, for a younger, more ambitious woman. He believed he was discarding a forgotten relic. He thought he had all the power, all the control. But he never imagined that the woman he discarded held the key not just to the house, but to his entire empire. This is the unbelievable story of how a wife left with nothing returned to claim everything. The cold autumn rain fell in relentless sheets against the leaded glass windows of Greywood Manor, each drop a tiny hammer against Lillian Sterling's fragile sense of peace. From the library, a room panelled in dark cherry wood and smelling of old leather and lemon polish, she watched the manicured lawns dissolve into a blur of green and grey. The house a sprawling stone behemoth on the most exclusive stretch of the New England coast had once felt like a fairy tale castle. Now, after 12 years of marriage to Damien Rochester, it felt like the world's most opulent prison. Lillian ran a slender finger over the spine of a first-edition Keats. She had curated this library, just as she had curated every room in the mansion. Damien had provided the limitless funds, but she had provided the soul. She had sourced the 18th century French tapestries, attended auctions for the perfect Regency-era furniture, and spent months convincing a reclusive Italian artist to paint the fresco on the grand hall ceiling. Damien saw these things as assets check marks on a list of billionaire necessities. Lillian saw them as the only parts of her life that still held beauty and meaning. The click of the library door broke her reverie. Damien stood there, immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver-black hair perfectly coiffed. At 50, he possessed the ruthless energy of a man half his age, his eyes the color of polished granite and just as hard. He wasn't looking at her, but at his phone, his thumb swiping impatiently. "The catering for the Foundation Gala on Saturday." He began, his voice devoid of warmth. "I spoke with Victoria. She thinks the menu is pedestrian. She wants to bring in Chef Antoine from Paris." Lillian's hands tightened on the book. Victoria Vance. The name was a shard of glass under her skin. Victoria was Damien's new protégé, a 28-year-old marketing VP at his global investment firm, Rochester Capital. She was sleek, sharp, and ambitious, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. For the past 6 months, her presence had been a constant, insidious poison, seeping into the cracks of their already fractured marriage. "I spent weeks working with the caterers, Damien," Lillian said, her voice quiet but steady. "The menu is classic elegant. It's what our donors expect." "Our donors expect the best, Lillian. Not what's comfortable," he retorted, finally looking up from his phone. His gaze swept over her, taking in her cashmere sweater and simple pearl earrings with a flicker of disdain. "Victoria has a better grasp of the image we need to project. Modern, aggressive, not antiquated." The insult, cloaked in corporate jargon, landed with precision. He wasn't just talking about the menu, he was talking about her. At 42, Lillian knew she was still a beautiful woman, but in Damien's world, beauty had a cruelly short shelf life. He was a collector, and he was growing tired of his prize acquisition. "I see," she said, placing the book back on the shelf with a hand that trembled slightly. "I suppose I should have consulted with her." "You should have," he agreed, completely missing her sarcasm. "I've given her oversight on the event. She'll be handling the final arrangements." He turned to leave his dismissal, as absolute as a king banishing a courtier. "Damien, wait!" Lillian called out, a sudden desperate need to fight rising within her. "We need to talk. About us. About her." He stopped, his back still to her, a long, tense silence stretching between them. When he finally turned, his face was a mask of cold fury. "There is nothing to talk about. My relationship with Victoria is a professional one. Her insight is valuable to the company. Something you wouldn't understand. I understand that she was with you in Monaco last month on our anniversary." Lillian countered, her voice gaining strength. "I understand the Cartier bracelet she wears is the one I saw you buying. Do you think I'm a fool?" Damien walked slowly towards her, his presence dominating the cavernous room. He stopped just a foot away, looking down at her. "I think you've become complacent," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "You live in this palace, you wear designer clothes, you spend my money filling it with your trinkets. You have a life other women would kill for, and you contribute nothing. Victoria, on the other hand, she adds value. She understands my world." Every word was a calculated blow. He was stripping away her worth piece by piece, reducing her role in their life together to that of a decorative, expensive parasite. "I made this house a home," she retorted, tears welling in her eyes. "I supported you when Rochester Capital was just an idea sketched on a napkin. I hosted the dinners. I charmed the investors. I stood by you through every risk, every failure, and every success. This life we have, I helped build it." A cruel, humorless smile touched his lips. "You helped? That's adorable. You were a charming hostess, I'll grant you that. But don't mistake your role. A good maitre d' helps a restaurant succeed. It doesn't mean he owns it." The sheer arrogance of the statement stole her breath. He saw her as staff, replaceable staff. Just then a sleek black car pulled up the long, winding driveway, its headlights cutting through the rain-soaked dusk. Victoria Vance emerged, sheltered by a chauffeur's umbrella, looking flawless despite the weather. Damien's eyes flickered towards the window, a flicker of anticipation in them. That was the final straw. The casual, blatant disrespect. "I want her out of our lives, Damien." Lillian said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and grief. "Out of our home, out of our business. Her or me." Damien looked from the approaching Victoria back to his wife. The decision was already made. His expression shifted from irritation to something chillingly final. "You're right," he said softly. "It is time for a change." He strode to the grand fireplace, pulling a velvet rope to summon the butler. When the elderly man Richards appeared moments later, Damien gave his order without even looking at him. "Richards, please escort Mrs. Rochester from the premises. She will not be returning." Richards froze, his professional composure cracking as he looked at Lillian in utter shock. "Sir, I don't understand." "It's simple," Damien said, his voice booming with authority. "She is no longer welcome here. Her belongings will be sent to wherever she ends up. For now, just show her out." Lillian stood, paralyzed. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. "Damien, you can't be serious," she whispered. "This is my home." "No," he corrected, walking towards the front hall to greet his guest. "It was my house. You were just living in it." He turned back, his face a mask of stone. "The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. You signed it. You get a one-time severance payment, and that's it. You have no claim on the company, the assets, or this property. My lawyers will be in touch." The front door opened, and Victoria swept in, shaking imaginary droplets from her designer coat. She saw Lillian and offered a small, triumphant smile. "Lillian, I hope I'm not interrupting." The scene was surreal. Damien was throwing her out of her own home while his mistress watched. The humiliation was a physical force pressing the air from her lungs. "Get out," Damien repeated to Lillian, his voice like the crack of a whip. He pointed a diamond cuff-linked finger at the colossal oak doors. "Get out. You have nothing. You are nothing without me." Richard's tears in his old eyes took a hesitant step toward her. "Madam." But Lillian held up a hand, a strange calm settling over her shock. She looked at Damien's smug face, at Victoria's predatory smile, at the home that had been her life's work. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break completely. With a dignity she didn't know she possessed, she walked past them. She grabbed her handbag from a console table, the only thing she would take with her. She didn't look back. As she stepped out into the raging storm, the massive oak doors clicking shut behind her, the raw reality hit her. She was 42 years old with no career, no family nearby, and a bank account that Damien could and would freeze by morning. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the contents of a small leather handbag. The millionaire had forced his wife out of the mansion, and in that moment, drenched and broken on the gravel driveway, she had no idea that the key to his destruction and her salvation was hidden within the very walls she had just been banished from. The first night of her new life was spent on a lumpy mattress in a sterile, overpriced hotel room overlooking a parking garage. The relentless rain that had been the backdrop to her eviction now seemed to mock her, a constant dreary drumbeat against the window pane. Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, the silk robe she had been wearing now feeling like a costume from a different life. It was damp and cold, clinging to her skin. She hadn't cried. The shock was a crystalline shell around her heart, too cold and hard for tears to penetrate. Morning came grey and unforgiving. She used the prepaid credit card she kept in her purse for emergencies to buy a simple set of clothes from a department store, jeans, a sweater, sneakers. Each item felt foreign, a uniform for a person she didn't know. Then came the first confirmation of her new reality. She tried to withdraw cash from an ATM. Card declined. She tried another. Account frozen. Damien had been ruthlessly efficient. He had severed her from their shared financial life as cleanly as a surgeon's scalpel. The one-time severance payment he'd mentioned would be tied up by his lawyers for months, doled out only after she signed away any and all future claims in a humiliating series of legal documents. Panic began to fray the edges of her composure. She had a few $1,000s in cash in her bag, a pittance that would evaporate in days. Her friends were his friends, couples they socialized with who owed their fortunes or social standing to Damien. Calling them would be an exercise in futility and shame. They would offer lukewarm sympathy before reporting back to him. There was only one person she could trust. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number. "Genevieve Croft, attorney at law." A crisp voice answered. "Jen, it's Lillian." There was a pause then. "Lily, my God, you sound awful. What's wrong?" The dam broke, the shell of shock shattered, and the story came tumbling out in a torrent of gasping, broken sentences. The argument, Victoria, the prenup being thrown out into the rain. Genevieve listened without interruption, her silence a comforting, solid presence on the other end of the line. "Where are you now?" Genevieve asked, her tone shifting from concerned friend to sharp-witted lawyer. "A hotel near the airport, the Northgate Inn. Stay put. I'm leaving the office now. I'll be there in 45 minutes, and Lillian—" "Don't talk to anyone, especially not any lawyers representing Damien." Hanging up, Lillian felt the first flicker of warmth she'd felt in 24 hours. Genevieve wasn't just her lawyer. She was her oldest friend. They had been roommates in college, two scholarship students, navigating a world of ivy-covered privilege. While Lillian had pursued art history, Genevieve had tackled law with a fierce determination born from a family that had known struggle. They had drifted apart after Lillian married Damien, their lives moving in opposite directions. But the bond remained. When Genevieve arrived, she took one look at Lillian's pale face and the grim hotel room and enveloped her in a hug. "We're getting you out of here," she said, her voice firm. "You're staying with me." That evening in the spare bedroom of Genevieve's cozy, book-filled apartment, the full weight of her situation crashed down on Lillian. She wasn't just homeless, she was stripped of her identity. For 12 years, she had been Mrs. Damien Rochester. Her days had been a blur of charity boards, gallery openings, and orchestrating a household staff of 15. Who was she without all that? The art history degree she'd earned with such passion felt like a distant memory, a skill set atrophied from disuse. "The prenup is as bad as he says," Genevieve confirmed a few days later, poring over a copy of the document at her dining table, which now served as their war room. "It was drafted by the most predatory legal firm in the city. You waived rights to everything his current assets, future earnings, properties. The severance is pathetic, less than a rounding error for him." "I was 29 and in love," Lillian murmured, staring into a cold cup of tea. "He said it was just a formality to protect his family's existing assets. I didn't even read it properly." "Of course you didn't," Genevieve said, her expression grim. "That's what men like him count on." She tapped a clause with her pen. "He can't touch your personal effects, things you owned before the marriage. But proving that for anything of value will be an uphill battle. He'll claim everything was a gift." Days turned into a week. Lillian's belongings arrived at a storage unit Genevieve had rented, dozens of boxes packed haphazardly by the Greywood staff. Sifting through them was an act of emotional archaeology, digging through the layers of her former life. A photo of her and Damien in Greece, smiling and happy. The dress she wore on their first date. Each item was a fresh stab of pain. One rainy afternoon, while unpacking a box labeled office, Lillian found her old college textbooks and notebooks. She ran her hand over a thick volume, American Industrial Architecture, 1880 to 1920. A wave of nostalgia washed over her. This was who she used to be, a scholar, someone fascinated by the stories that buildings told. She idly flipped through one of her own notebooks, its pages filled with her neat, precise script. Her thesis had been on reclusive, eccentric magnates of the Gilded Age who had designed their own estates. And then she saw the name Silas Croft. An electric jolt went through her. "Jen," she called out, her voice trembling with a sudden, inexplicable excitement. "Come look at this." Genevieve came over, a mug of coffee in her hand. "What is it?" "Silas Croft. He built Greywood Manor in 1905. He was your great-great-granduncle, wasn't he?" Genevieve nodded. The black sheep of the family, made a fortune in some obscure manufacturing process, built that monster of a house, and then became a recluse. The family wealth was mostly gone by my grandfather's time. All that's left are the stories. I studied him for my thesis. Lillian said, her mind racing, connecting disparate threads of memory. He was more than just a rich eccentric. He was a brilliant inventor. He held dozens of patents, but he was paranoid about his competitors. The stories you mentioned, what were they? Genevieve shrugged. Just family law, mostly. That he hid his greatest invention somewhere in the house. That the blueprints to his fortune were etched into the walls. My granddad used to say Silas believed a man's house should be his vault, his fortress, and his legacy all in one. Lillian stared at her friend, her heart starting to pound. A house as a vault. She thought of Greywood Manor, a place she knew more intimately than anyone, even Damien. She knew its every secret quirk, the loose floorboard in the West Gallery, the strange draught behind the library fireplace, the odd non-functional brass rosette on the grand staircase. Damien saw the house as a status symbol. He had never bothered to learn its history. He'd once joked that he bought the shell and filled it with better stuff. But Lillian had spent years living within that shell. She'd read Silas Croft's journals, which were kept in the library's special collections. She'd studied the original blueprints, framed in the study, fascinated by their intricate, almost obsessive detail. Damien knows nothing about that house, Jen. Lillian said, her voice barely a whisper. He thinks it's just a pile of expensive stone. But Silas Croft didn't just build a house. He built a puzzle box. A wild, impossible idea began to form in her mind. What if the family law was true? What if Silas had hidden something? Not treasure, but something more valuable. Something foundational. Damien had bought the house and everything in it, lock, stock, and barrel from the last of Croft's impoverished descendants, 20 years ago. What if the purchase included something he had never even known he possessed? "What are you thinking, Lily?" Genevieve asked, seeing the new light in her friend's eyes. Lillian looked up from the old notebook, the despair that had clouded her features for weeks, starting to recede, replaced by a steely resolve. "I'm thinking that Damien believes he took everything from me," she said, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. "But he made one critical mistake. He left me with the one thing that might matter more than all his money knowledge. He threw me out of my home, Jen. I think it's time I started looking for the key." The public library became Lillian's new sanctuary. Stripped of her access to Greywood Manor's private collection, she dove into the city's archives with a scholar's fervor she hadn't felt in over a decade. The world of charity galas and interior design faded away, replaced by the scent of aging paper and the quiet scratch of a pen in a notebook. She was no longer Lillian Rochester, the discarded socialite. She was a researcher on a mission. Silas Croft wasn't just an inventor, Lillian explained to Genevieve one evening, spreading out photocopied documents across the dining table. He was a visionary in metallurgy. In the early 1900s, he patented a series of unique metal alloys. They were incredibly strong, lightweight, and resistant to corrosion. Revolutionary for their time. "Okay," Genevieve said, trying to follow. "So he was a clever industrialist. How does that help us? Because his crowning achievement, the one that made his initial fortune, was a process he called osmium fusion. There are rumors about it in these old industry journals, but no specifics. The patent is sealed, and the company he founded, Croft Consolidated, was notoriously secretive. It produced a single unnamed product for the government and select private industries." Lillian tapped a brittle, yellowed newspaper clipping from 1925. Then in the late 20s, Croft Consolidated just vanished. The assets were absorbed into a series of shell corporations. Most historians assume the company folded during the Great Depression. Genevieve frowned. "I'm still not seeing the connection to Damien." "The connection is Rochester Capital. Lillian said, her voice electric with discovery. I started digging into its origins. Damien always said he built it from nothing, but that's a lie. His first major acquisition, the one that gave him the capital to start trading, was a small, obscure manufacturing firm called North Star Holdings. He bought it for a song 30 years ago. She slid another file across the table. It contained the incorporation documents for North Star Holdings, which she'd paid a paralegal to pull. Look at the original charter for North Star from 1931. And now, look at this. She placed it next to a faint, barely legible photocopy of the Croft Consolidated letterhead from 1925. Genevieve's eyes widened. The corporate seal, it's the same symbol, a gear intertwined with a crucible. Exactly, Lillian confirmed. North Star Holdings wasn't a new company. It was the legally reconstituted ghost of Croft Consolidated. The name was changed, the board shuffled, but the core patents, Silas's life's work, remained its primary asset. Damien didn't buy a defunct company. He unwittingly bought the exclusive rights to Silas Croft's osmium fusion process. The pieces were slotting into place with breathtaking speed. That process, Lillian continued, is now the foundation of modern aerospace engineering and advanced microcircuitry. The alloys are used in everything from satellite components to surgical tools. Damien doesn't even know it. His tech division licenses the manufacturing rights through a dozen subsidiaries. He thinks the value is in the complex supply chain he built, but the real value, the source code, the original intellectual property is Croft's patent. He owns the golden goose, but he thinks he's just selling eggs. Genevieve leaned back in her chair, stunned. My God, Lily, if that patent is as foundational as you say its value would be, incalculable. It would be a significant percentage of Damien's entire net worth. More than that, Lillian said, her eyes gleaming. It would be his cornerstone. Without it, the entire tech division of Rochester Capital is built on sand. A heavy silence fell over the room as the magnitude of the discovery sank in. But a crucial problem remained. Okay, Genevieve said, ever the pragmatist. We know the what. We still don't know the how. How do we prove it, and more importantly, how do we leverage it? The patent is in his name, now passed down through the corporate ownership. That's the mystery, Lillian admitted. Why would Silas, a man obsessed with control and legacy structure his company, to be so easily forgotten and absorbed? It doesn't make sense. He was paranoid. He wouldn't just let his life's work vanish into a legal shell game unless it was deliberate. Lillian's mind went back to the journals she had read at Greywood Manor. Silas Croft wrote not just about metallurgy, but about philosophy, about legacy. He lamented having no direct heirs he trusted. He saw his business contemporaries as vultures in tailored suits, a description that fit Damien perfectly. He wrote about creating a legacy that could only be unlocked by someone with wit and appreciation, not brute force acquisition. He left a key, Lillian whispered. The family lore about him hiding his fortune in the house wasn't about money. It was about control. There has to be a document. A hidden codicil, a master deed, something that supersedes the conventional chain of ownership. And he would have hidden it in the one place he believed was truly secure inside the walls of Greywood Manor. The challenge was immense. They were two women with limited resources against a billionaire with a phalanx of lawyers. They needed irrefutable proof, something physical they could take to a judge. They needed to get back inside the house. Their chance came from an unexpected source. A glossy magazine arrived at Genevieve's apartment, forwarded from Lillian's old address. On the cover was Damien with Victoria on his arm. The headline read, Damien Rochester and Victoria Vance, a new era at Greywood Manor. The article detailed their whirlwind romance and their plans for the estate. "He's a monster," Genevieve spat, looking at the photos of Victoria posing in Lillian's rose garden. But Lillian was focused on the text. "They're planning a full-scale modernization," she read aloud, her blood running cold. "A top-to-bottom renovation to bring the historic estate into the 21st century. He's going to gut the house, Jen. He's going to tear out the paneling rip up the floors. If there's something hidden there, it could be destroyed forever." The article mentioned a date. In 2 weeks, Damien and Victoria would be hosting a lavish engagement party, billed as the social event of the season. The house would be full of guests, staff, and security. "That's our window," Lillian said, a daring, desperate plan forming in her mind. "During that party, no one would expect it. Security will be focused on the guests at the front of the house, not the old service wing." "Lily, that's insane," Genevieve protested. "You can't just break into Greywood Manor." "I don't have to break in," Lillian replied, her mind's eye already tracing a familiar path. "I know a way in. A forgotten tradesman's entrance in the wine cellar, behind a false wall. Silas Croft built it into the original design. I found it years ago. I never told Damien because I considered it a charming historical quirk. Now it might be our only way." The fear was real, a cold knot in her stomach. But the alternative, letting Damien obliterate the last vestige of Silas Croft's legacy and her only hope for justice, was unthinkable. She looked at the photograph of the mansion she had loved and curated the home that had been stolen from her. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a battleground. And she was preparing to storm the castle. The 2 weeks leading up to the engagement party were a blur of intense preparation. Lillian's focus narrowed to a single point: Silas Croft's architectural plans. She couldn't access the originals framed in Greywood's study, but her meticulous research for her college thesis had led her to the city archives, where a secondary, less detailed set was filed for historical preservation. She and Genevieve spent hours hunched over the massive, brittle sheets of vellum, the faint blue lines a map to their last hope. He was obsessed with symmetry and duality, Lillian observed, tracing a line with her finger. "Look here. The main library has a fireplace. On the opposite side of the central axis in the music room, there's another fireplace, a perfect mirror image. This pattern repeats everywhere." "It's clever architecture, but is it a clue?" Genevieve asked her legal mind, searching for concrete evidence, not artistic flourishes. "With Silas, everything was a clue," Lillian insisted. "His journals were full of riddles and philosophical musings about balance. He wrote, 'Every lock has its key, every front has its back, every declaration has its hidden truth.' He's not just talking about construction. He's telling us how he thinks." Lillian's memory of the house was their most valuable asset. She closed her eyes and walked through the halls in her mind, picturing every detail. The grand staircase was the centerpiece of the mansion, a marvel of carved mahogany that snaked up 3 floors. "The rosette," she said suddenly, her eyes snapping open. "On the main newel post of the grand staircase. It's made of brass, intricately carved with his corporate seal, the gear and crucible. I always thought it was just decorative, but it doesn't match any other metalwork in the house. It's always been slightly loose to the touch." She flipped through the blueprints. "There's nothing on the plans here, just a standard newel post. It must have been a late addition, something he kept off the official records." "A loose rosette on a staircase," Genevieve said skeptically. "Lily, this is starting to sound like a treasure hunt in a children's novel." "Maybe that's the point," Lillian shot back. Damien and his corporate raiders think in terms of legal clauses and financial statements. They would never look for a solution hidden in plain sight, disguised as art. Silas built a fortress for his legacy, and the lock isn't in a bank vault. It's part of the house itself. Her theory was that the rosette wasn't a lock, but a release mechanism. But for what? She cross-referenced the staircase's location with the mansion's structural plans. Directly beneath the base of the staircase in the sub-basement was a small bricked-off chamber marked on the plans as utility conduit. It was an area she had never seen likely sealed for a century. The plan became terrifyingly specific. During the party, while hundreds of guests mingled on the main floor and terrace, Lillian would use the hidden cellar entrance. She would navigate the labyrinthine basement, locate the sealed chamber, and hope that her hunch about the staircase mechanism was correct. As the day of the party approached, news of the event was everywhere. Society blogs gushed about the modern fairy tale of Damien and Victoria. They praised Victoria's fresh vision for the historic estate. A news item mentioned that the initial phase of the renovation, the exploratory demolition, was scheduled to begin the Monday morning after the party. They were running out of time. Genevieve handled the logistics. She acquired a set of dark, practical jumpsuits, gloves, headlamps, and a small toolkit. Her role was to be the lookout and distraction. She had managed to secure a last-minute invitation to the party through a legal colleague feigning a desire to network. Her job was to keep an eye on Damien and his security team, and to create a diversion if necessary. "If you're not out in 90 minutes, I'm calling in an anonymous tip about a fire," Genevieve said, her voice tight with anxiety as they did their final review. "That will get the building evacuated." "It won't come to that," Lillian said, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. The night of the party was clear and cold, a sliver of moon hanging in a sky full of stars. From a rented car parked on a hill a mile away, they watched the stream of luxury vehicles snake up the driveway to Greywood Manor. The mansion was ablaze with light music drifting faintly on the wind. It looked like a brilliant, beautiful jewel. And Lillian felt a pang of loss so sharp it almost took her breath away. At 10 p.m., when the party was in full swing, they set their plan in motion. Genevieve, looking stunning in a black evening gown, drove to the front entrance. Lillian, clad in the dark jumpsuit, circled around on foot through the dense woods that bordered the estate, her heart pounding with every rustle of leaves. She reached the back of the property, the familiar scent of damp earth and pine filling the air. The cellar entrance was exactly as she remembered, a low, heavy oak door, almost completely obscured by overgrown ivy, set into the foundation at the rear of the wine cellar. The old iron key, which she had found years ago and kept in a small jewelry box, was now in her pocket. It felt heavy, like the key to her entire future. The lock was stiff and rusty, but with a groan it turned. The door opened into pitch blackness and the smell of cold stone and aged wine. She slipped inside, closing the door silently behind her, and turned on her headlamp. The narrow beam cut a small circle in the oppressive darkness. She was in. Now the real test began. The air in the cellar was thick and cold, carrying the earthy scent of the mansion's deep foundations. Lillian's headlamp beam danced across rows of wine racks, most of them now empty, already cleared out in preparation for the renovation. She moved silently, her sneakers making no sound on the stone floor, every nerve ending tingling with adrenaline. This was the underbelly of her former life, a part of the house she had rarely visited, and now it was her only path back. Navigating by memory, and the tattered blueprints clutched in her hand, she found the passage that led towards the sub-basement. It was a dark, narrow corridor, lined with thick pipes, sweating with condensation. The distant thumping of the party's bass line was a faint, surreal pulse that vibrated through the stone, a reminder of the glittering world just a few floors above her. She found the wall. According to the plans, the utility conduit should be right behind it. It was a section of newer-looking brickwork, clearly intended to seal something off. There was no handle, no seam, no visible way in. Her heart sank. What if she was wrong? What if it was just a walled-off space, meaningless and empty? She thought back to Silas Croft's obsession with duality. Every front has its back. The wall was the front. The release had to be somewhere else. It had to be the rosette. A new wave of urgency washed over her. She couldn't get to the staircase from the basement. She had to go up. She found the old servants' staircase a tight, winding spiral of iron hidden behind a utility door. It was a secret artery of the house used by ghosts, and now by her. She climbed, emerging into the quiet, dimly lit corridor of the main floor's service wing. The sounds of the party were louder here, laughter, clinking glasses, music. Peeking through a door, she could see the back of the bar waiters rushing back and forth. She was perilously close to being discovered. Her dark jumpsuit, which had felt like camouflage in the basement, now felt like a neon sign. She crept along the hallway, her back against the wall, until she reached the great hall. Through the arched entryway, she saw it, the grand staircase, bathed in the light of a crystal chandelier. Guests in tuxedos and gowns drifted past it, champagne flutes in hand. Damien was there, standing near the base, his arm possessively around Victoria's waist. They were laughing, the picture of a power couple. A surge of cold fury gave Lillian the courage she needed. She needed a distraction. She pulled out her burner phone and sent Genevieve a coded text, now. A few moments later, on the far side of the hall, a loud crash and a woman's shriek cut through the party chatter. A waiter had, it seemed, tripped and sent an entire tray of champagne glasses cascading onto the marble floor. Genevieve was there, rushing to help, her voice full of dramatic concern. The commotion drew the attention of guests, and more importantly, the security guards stationed near the entrance. Damien and Victoria turned their faces etched with annoyance at the disruption. It was her chance. Lillian darted from the shadows, her movements swift and silent. She reached the newel post at the base of the staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her fingers found the brass rosette. It was cool to the touch. She tried to turn it. It wouldn't budge. Panic flared. She pushed it. Nothing. She pulled. With a faint click, the rosette slid outwards, revealing not a keyhole or a button, but a small recessed dial like one on a safe. It was marked with a series of tiny, almost invisible etchings, alchemical symbols. Her art history background, her study of the esoteric symbols favored by Gilded Age artisans, suddenly became the most important knowledge she possessed. She recognized them symbols for iron, copper, lead, and gold. It was a combination lock, but the combination wasn't numbers. It was a process, Silas's process. Her mind raced through her research on his metallurgical work. She remembered a phrase from his journal, from the common strength, from the bright flexibility, from the heavy permanence. But all are purified into the singular prize. It was a recipe. With trembling fingers, she turned the dial, clicking it into place, at each symbol in sequence, iron, copper, lead, gold. For a moment, nothing happened. The party's noise swelled again as the mess was cleared. Damien was turning back in her direction. Then she heard it, not a loud noise, but a deep, grinding rumble that seemed to come from the very bones of the house. It was low enough that no one else seemed to notice. She didn't wait to see what happened. She sprinted back to the service corridor and plunged back down the servants' staircase into the darkness of the basement. She ran her headlamp beam bouncing wildly back to the bricked-off wall. A section of the wall about 4 feet wide had retracted into the ceiling, revealing a dark, square opening. It had worked. A wave of triumphant relief washed over her, but there was no time to celebrate. She ducked into the hidden chamber. It was small, no larger than a closet, and filled with the dry, musty smell of ancient paper. In the center of the room stood a simple iron pedestal. On top of it sat a heavy, leather-bound ledger, its cover embossed with the familiar gear and crucible seal of Croft Consolidated. Her hands shook as she opened it. The first page was not a financial record, but a handwritten declaration penned in Silas Croft's elegant, spidery script. It was a master charter. She scanned the dense, legalistic text, her mind struggling to comprehend the full scope of what she was seeing. It was a unique private corporate charter, predating and superseding all subsequent public filings. Silas, deeply mistrustful of corporate law, had used an obscure 19th-century legal precedent to create a document that tied the ownership of his patents and the company that controlled them not to a transferable paper stock, but to a physical chain of custody of the charter itself, and a bizarre but brilliant succession clause. The clause stated that control of Croft Consolidated and all its assets, including the osmium fusion patent, would pass to any future owner of the Greywood Manor property, unless a direct blood descendant of the Croft line presented a specific authenticated claim. In that event, all controlling rights would immediately and irrevocably revert to that descendant. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. Genevieve Croft. Silas had created a time bomb. He had allowed his company to be sold, knowing that any buyer would be a mere caretaker. The true control was a dormant title, waiting for a Croft heir to awaken it. He had bet on his own bloodline, that one day someone would be smart enough to solve his puzzle. Damien had never been the true owner. He was a placeholder. Tucked into the back of the ledger was another smaller envelope. Inside was the original sealed patent for the osmium fusion process, bearing the official stamp of the United States Patent Office from 1907. It was the smoking gun. She grabbed the ledger and the patent. Just as she was about to leave, her light caught something etched into the iron pedestal. It was a short, final message from Silas Croft. "Let the vultures pick the bones. My soul is in the foundation." A faint noise from the corridor, a door opening a footstep, jerked her back to the present. Security, perhaps doing a sweep. She switched off her headlamp, plunging the room into absolute blackness. She held her breath, her body rigid, clutching the heavy ledger to her chest. This book was her victory. It was her vindication. Now, all she had to do was get out alive. The boardroom on the 50th floor of the Rochester Capitol Tower was a temple of corporate power. A single slab of black marble served as a table surrounded by chairs that cost more than the car Lillian now drove. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of the city skyline. Damien Rochester sat at the head of the table, flanked by a team of 4 lawyers, their faces set in expressions of bored, expensive confidence. Victoria Vance sat slightly behind him, a silent partner in his triumph, her smile sharp and predatory. On the other side of the table sat Lillian and Genevieve. They looked small and out of place, two Davids in a den of Goliaths. "Let's get this over with," Damien said, his voice dripping with condescension. He gestured to his lead counsel, a bulldog of a man named Peterson. "I believe my estranged wife has some fanciful notions. Peterson, please enlighten her." Peterson cleared his throat. "Miss Sterling," he began, addressing Lillian as if she were a child. "We are here to finalize the terms of your divorce settlement. We have the papers ready. In exchange for the agreed-upon severance, you will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and waive all future claims. It's all very standard." Genevieve placed a hand on Lillian's arm, a silent signal to stay calm. "We are not here to discuss the divorce settlement, Mr. Peterson," Genevieve said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the smug atmosphere. "We are here to discuss a matter of corporate ownership." Damien actually chuckled. "Ownership? Darling, we've been over this. The prenup is a fortress. You don't own the salt shaker on this table, let alone a share of my company." "My client isn't making a claim on your company, Mr. Rochester," Genevieve countered. "I am." The statement hung in the air, momentarily confusing the assembled lawyers. Damien's smirk faltered. "You on what grounds?" "On the grounds of heredity and prior claim pursuant to the original master charter of Croft Consolidated executed in 1908. Genevieve said, her voice ringing with authority. She slid a certified copy of the document she and Lillian had found across the marble table. "A company which, through a series of name changes, became North Star Holdings, the foundational asset upon which you built this entire enterprise." Peterson picked up the document, his eyes scanning the first page. A flicker of disbelief, then concern, crossed his features. He began reading faster, his brow furrowed. "This is preposterous," he stammered, looking at Damien. "It seems to be some kind of antique corporate document." "It's more than that," Lillian said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. "It's a ticking time bomb that Silas Croft built into his legacy. He knew a man like you would come along one day, Damien, a man who would buy the beautiful shell but never bother to understand its soul, a man who sees value, but not history." Damien stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. "What are you talking about? What is this nonsense? The charter is quite clear." Genevieve explained, her tone sharp and precise as a scalpel. "It establishes a unique condition of ownership for the company's core assets, namely the patent portfolio of Silas Croft. Ownership was tied to the Greywood Manor property, acting as a placeholder. However, it also contains a reversionary clause. The clause stipulates that all controlling rights to the assets and any enterprise built upon them revert immediately and irrevocably to a direct blood descendant of Silas Croft upon the presentation of a formal claim." She let the words sink in. "My name is Genevieve Croft. Silas Croft was my great-great-granduncle. This is my formal claim." Peterson's face had gone pale. He was whispering furiously to the other lawyers, who were now frantically typing on their laptops. "This is insane," Damien roared, slamming his fist on the table. "I bought that company fair and square. That patent is the property of Rochester Capital." "Was it?" Lillian asked softly. "Did you ever actually see the original patent, Damien, or did you just acquire the corporate entity that supposedly held it?" Genevieve slid a second document across the table, the original sealed patent for osmium fusion. The master charter also stipulated that the physical patent document must accompany any transfer of ownership. It never did. It remained hidden along with the charter inside the mansion. Therefore, your acquisition of North Star Holdings was legally incomplete. You acquired the company, but you never secured its primary asset. You've been operating for 30 years on a flawed title. The room fell silent. The frantic typing stopped. Damien's lawyers looked at him, not with confidence, but with panic. They were high-priced corporate litigators, experts in modern mergers and acquisitions. They were utterly unprepared for a Gilded Age legal puzzle box crafted by a paranoid genius a century ago. The charter has been authenticated, Genevieve continued, pressing her advantage. Its chain of custody is established by its location. The reversionary clause is ironclad, which means, Mr. Rochester, that as of this moment, the foundational patents that underpin your entire tech and aerospace division assets, valued conservatively at 70% of your company's total worth, do not belong to you. They belong to me. Damien stared, his face ashen, his empire crumbling around him in the space of a single sentence. He looked from Genevieve's resolute face to Lillian's calm, unwavering gaze. He saw it then. This wasn't about money. It was about justice. You, he whispered, his voice hoarse with rage, pointing a trembling finger at Lillian. This was you. You did this. You told me I contributed nothing. Lillian replied, her voice steady and devoid of malice. I suppose I finally found a way to add value. Victoria Vance, who had been watching the exchange like a spectator at a tennis match, slowly stood up. She looked at Damien's shattered expression, at the panicked faces of his lawyers, and made a swift calculation. She was attached to a sinking ship. Without a word, she picked up her purse and walked out of the boardroom. The legal battle that followed was brief and brutal. Damien's team tried everything. They claimed the charter was a forgery, that the clause was unenforceable, that it was an antique legal relic. But the courts found otherwise. The document was authentic. The clause was legally sound, and the precedent, though obscure, was binding. The final court order was a death blow. Control of the patents and all profits derived from them for the past 3 decades was to be handed over to a trust managed by Genevieve Croft. The financial clawback was so immense that it didn't just cripple Rochester Capital, it effectively dismantled it. Damien Rochester, the titan of industry, was ruined. Genevieve, true to her word, immediately signed over discretionary control of the newly formed Croft Legacy Trust to Lillian. The news sent shockwaves through the financial world. The story of the billionaire, toppled by a century-old secret hidden in his own home, was the stuff of legend. But for Lillian, it wasn't a legend. It was the end of one life and the beginning of another. The day Lillian returned to Greywood Manor was crisp and sunny. The autumn leaves a riot of gold and crimson. She walked the final stretch of the driveway, the crunch of gravel under her feet, the only sound. The house stood before her, silent and imposing, no longer a prison, but a promise. The colossal oak doors that had been slammed shut behind her were now ajar. She stepped inside. The great hall was eerily quiet, dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. Sheets were draped over the furniture, giving the room a ghostly, slumbering feel. A figure stood by the grand staircase, his back to her. He was thinner, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. He turned. It was Damien. The arrogant fire in his eyes had been replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. Just collecting a few personal things, he said, his voice a dry rasp. He gestured vaguely at a small box on the floor. The bank has taken everything else. He looked around the cavernous hall, his eyes filled with a dawning, agonizing understanding. How? he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "After all these years, how did you know? You owned the house, Damien." "I understood it," Lillian replied, her voice calm and steady. "You saw an asset to be leveraged. I saw a home with a history, and I paid attention." He looked at her, then really looked at her not as an accessory, but as the architect of his downfall. He gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "The one person I thought was powerless," he murmured to himself. Without another word, he picked up his box and walked past her, a diminished man leaving the ruins of his empire. Lillian watched him go until he disappeared from sight, feeling not a surge of victory, but the quiet finality of closure. She walked through the silent rooms, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. This place, with its ghosts and memories, could never be her home again. It would be something better. Her plan was already in motion. The Croft Legacy Trust, under her direction, would transform Greywood Manor into a museum and research institute dedicated to the Gilded Age genius of Silas Croft. The vast fortune, once a tool of corporate greed, would now fund grants and scholarships for women in art history, engineering, and law. A legacy of empowerment, not ego. Lillian stepped out onto the grand stone terrace overlooking the gardens she had so lovingly tended. The sea air was clean and sharp. She was no longer Mrs. Damien Rochester, an object in a gilded cage. She was Lillian Sterling, a woman who had been cast out with nothing and had reclaimed everything, not the money, but herself. Her future was her own, a foundation of her own making. What an incredible journey of intellect, resilience, and poetic justice. Lillian Sterling's story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths often lie dormant, hidden beneath the roles society, or even those closest to us, expect us to play. It shows that true power isn't always in a bank account. Sometimes it's in a dusty book, a forgotten blueprint, or the quiet knowledge that everyone else has overlooked. Have you ever felt underestimated? What hidden strengths do you possess that the world has yet to see? If Lillian's incredible story of vindication inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps our channel. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner power. And most importantly, if you want more stories of unbelievable real-life drama and triumph, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching.